Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about some books that I read in April 2022. It was a little bit of a strange reading month for me. I would actually kind of compare it to being on a seesaw. I'd be up, I'd be down, and sometimes I would just be straight in the middle. Some books I really liked, some books I thought were letdowns, and then other ones, I had so few feelings about them that I don't even feel like it's worth discussing them. So for both of our sakes, I'm only going to be talking about the books that I had substantial opinions on in this video. I don't feel like it's worth it to bring up books when I really don't have much to say about them. So I'm going to start off by discussing all the fiction books that I read in April. I've been starting with fiction lately in these TBRs and wrap-ups, and I quite like that. So the first two books that I want to talk to you about, I'm going to be speaking about them as a pair, because not only did I read portions of both of them during Try a Chapter Tags last year, so they have that in common, but I also felt like they had a lot in common subject matter-wise. That's why I chose to read them during the same month. The first book within that pair is called A Guide for the Perplexed by Dara Horn. This book has dual narratives, but the first storyline, the more dominant of the two storylines, follows a software genius named Josephine, who runs her own enormously successful tech company. And mainly to make her company look good, she decides to go over to Egypt to help this library update their technology. They had requested her services, and she decides to go over. But while she's there, she is abducted and held hostage, which gives her jealous sister Judith the perfect opportunity to take over Josephine's life back at home. The second storyline is much more brief. It follows a Cambridge professor on the hunt for a medieval archive within a Cairo synagogue. And that second storyline was one of my biggest issues with this book, because we were in it very infrequently. We would only very rarely dip in to it, so I kind of forgot that it existed at times. And it seemed like it was there just as window dressing. There are a lot of religious allusions in this book. There are obviously connections between these two storylines because of that religious element. And for instance, the whole Josephine storyline is kind of a retelling of the story of Joseph and his jealous brothers. But I felt like the author was so focused on sending those messages through the writing of this book that she actually lost focus on the story itself. And it cost her the story in this book, as far as I'm concerned. I couldn't wait for this book to be over. But then the other book within this pair, I liked a whole lot more. It's called People of the Book by Geraldine Brooks. And in this book, we follow a conservationist named Hannah, who is tasked with looking at this old, invaluable Hebrew manuscript. And when she does, she finds a number of little things on or in it, like an insect wing in the binding of the book, or a small stain of unknown origin on one of the pages. So throughout this book, we're getting the main story of Hannah trying to solve the mystery of this Haggadah, the Sarajevo Haggadah, but then we're also getting flashbacks showing us how these things came to be on or in this manuscript. This one I really enjoyed. I will say I liked some of the flashback chapters more than others. Sometimes I actually found myself growing a little bit impatient, a little bit frustrated with the flashback chapters because I was so ready to get back to Hannah's story. I wanted to see what she had going on. But other than that, I felt like this book kept me so engaged. The story was so well thought through. It's just a really well done book. Those flashback chapters had the ability, more often than not, to really just suck me into the story. And I'm the type of reader that it takes me a little bit of time to warm up to a new story, to new characters. But I was invested in those flashback chapters like 2 paragraphs in. I am very glad that I kept this book around and that I finally went on to read it because I really enjoyed it. A Guide for the Perplexed? Maybe not so much. I do remember really enjoying the early pages of that last year when I did the Try a Chapter Tag, and I liked those early pages again when I restarted the book this year. but I guess that's just an inherent risk of the try a chapter tag. You can like the early pages of something, and then it ultimately goes on to be something that is not for you, which is what happened here. So that was a loss, but then again, I had a win with People of the Book. So I guess we call that a draw. Now this next book. Let me start off with the positives and say that after my reading month in April, I am now one step closer to achieving my goal of reading through all of Meg Wollitzer's backlist. Because in April, I read This Is My Life. This is Meg Wollitzer's third novel, originally titled This Is Your Life, renamed to match the movie title, the movie adaptation. But this is a story about an overweight stand-up comic raising her two daughters on her own. And I only mention that she's overweight because not only does that fact make up the entirety of this stand-up comics act, but it also basically makes up the entirety of this book. This entire book was dominated by discussions about how much these three women weighed. One of the daughters is thin like their father, but the other daughter, Erica, is overweight like her mother. And it makes up her entire identity. She doesn't really think about it in any kind of a deep way. She doesn't make any effort to change. She just wants to complain about it. I have a theory that when Meg Wolitzer wrote this back in the 80s, she had gained a few pounds and hated it because it seemed to be the only thing on her mind as she wrote this book. This is by far the worst Meg Wolitzer novel that I have read thus far. It is the first of hers that I have actively disliked, which is unfortunate. I then went on to watch the movie adaptation of this book to see if it was any better. That movie was Nora Ephron's directorial debut. It's a very loose adaptation of the first third of this novel, and it was just a mess of a different kind. So I'm not a fan of this all around. I didn't really like anything about it, but at least now having read it, I am one step closer to achieving my goal. But now on to happier things, like the fact that in the month of April, I had a lot of written reviews appear in print and online, and I also did a ton of writing, which I'm not mad about because I love my job as a freelancer. But one of the reviews that went up, I am extremely excited to tell you about because it was my very first piece in the Rumpus. I wrote a review of Quan Barry's new novel, When I'm Gone, Look for Me in the East. This book follows a young Buddhist monk, his twin brother, and then a small group of people as they travel across Mongolia in search of a reincarnation of a religious figure. This book has some seriously gorgeous imagery. It's calming, but then it's also completely transportive. I was so impressed by this book that it inspired me to write what is probably the best review I've ever written, at least thus far. If you would like to read it, if you'd like to learn more about this book, I will link that for you in the description box below. Then a piece I actually wrote a while back just appeared in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette this month. I reviewed Win Me Something by Kyle Lucia Wu, which is a book about a young woman working as a nanny for a wealthy family in New York City. And this young woman never really felt that she belonged in her own family when she was growing up and still in her young adulthood. Both of her parents remarried after their divorce when the main character was very young and they started new families. So she didn't really feel like she belonged to either one of those. And then she's also biracial, so she had additional feelings of not being seen and not feeling like she belonged anywhere. So working as a nanny for this family was both good and bad for her. This being another nanny book, I think you'll enjoy this one if you liked Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed. But if you want to hear more about it, you want to hear more of my thoughts, I'll link my review in the description box below. And then finally, one of the reviews that I spent a lot of time working on during April also actually appeared during the month of April because it is a very hot new release. It's The Candy House by Jennifer Egan. My editor at the Post-Gazette had reached out to me asking me if I could review it, and it was pretty close to pub date. So I entered this tornado of a period where I very quickly reread A Visit from the Goon Squad, which is this book's sister novel. They're a part of the same universe. I hadn't read Goon Squad in nearly a decade. Like, I read it pretty close to when it came out. I think I read it in like 2013. So obviously I needed to refresh my memory. I then found a character map online that I added to as I read through The Candy House. And then after I finished both of those, the review just poured out of me. It was a very intense period, but I loved every minute of it. Just in case you've never read A Visit from the Goon Squad, or in case it's been a while, let me just say that I think Goon Squad is really good. I really enjoyed it during my first read through, and I really enjoyed it again after this reread. But I definitely think you should either read it for the first time or give it a reread before reading The Candy House. And not just because it will definitely refresh your memory and a lot of characters reappear, hence that manic character map I just showed you, but also because I think if you reread it before reading The Candy House, you will see what I saw. And that's the fact that The Candy House is even better than A Visit from the Goon Squad. And Jennifer Egan won a Pulitzer for Goon Squad. If you want to hear why I think so, you want to hear more about The Candy House, I will link that review, of course, in the description box below. But then I read 3 nonfiction books that I wanted to mention in this video. The first is a memoir called Inconceivable by Alex Johnston, in which the author discusses how hard she and her husband worked to start their family and how full of both heartbreak and joy that journey was for them. This author was in her 30s when she and her husband decided that it was the right time to start their family. And that's very common these days. Women spend a lot of time completing their education and then starting their career, and it just naturally pushes the time when you start your family later than it has been in previous generations. But the unfair fact of the matter is that fertility peaks for women at about age 28. So our bodies haven't really kept up with the way we're living our lives, and many women in their 30s struggle to conceive, which is exactly what happened to this author. She and her husband pursued what seems like every option out there in order to have their own family, and eventually they were able to achieve their dream, but not without a lot of tragedy along the way. Parts of this were absolutely devastating to read. I can't lie to you about that, but I really appreciated her candor in telling her story. She says at the beginning of this book that her goal in writing this book was to just let other women know what it's like to go through this experience. If you're past 30 and you're thinking about having kids, I would definitely recommend this one. There are those difficult passages, that is for sure, but this book could also be a very valuable resource for you, especially because at one point, she just straight up lists everything she would have done way back when if she had known then what she knows now, all the things she would have done from the very start. So that's why I think this book could be a good resource if you're considering starting a family past 30. I am past 30, but I am personally not planning on having kids, but I am planning on keeping this book around just in case any of my friends ever need its wisdom. The other memoir I read during April was Bomb Shelter by Mary Laura Philpott, which is a memoir in essays that discuss a variety of topics, but they mainly have to do with anxieties, family, anxieties about family, especially after a health emergency that you learn about in the early pages of the book. This book was so hyped up. I really expected to love this one, but maybe I'm just immune to this book's particular love potion because I thought it was just okay. There were times when it made me smile. I was interested in that health mystery. But most of the time, while I was reading this, I was just wondering why I was being invited inside of someone else's anxiety spiral. And then when I was firmly inside of her worry tornado, I was being expected to enjoy myself. I have my own anxieties. I don't need to take anybody else's on. So like I said before, this was just okay. It was just whatever. I did enjoy meeting Frank, the turtle on the cover of this book, and since I'm a well-known animal lover, I'm sure that does not surprise you. But overall, I just found this to be entirely forgettable. And coming from someone with a memory like mine, a memory some people tend to find freakish, that's saying something. But then the last nonfiction book that I read during the month of April that I wanted to mention in this video is the latest from Susan Cain, the author of Quiet. Her new book is called Bittersweet. And it's all about what is to be gained by accepting the fact that the bitter, the sadder parts of life and the happier, the sweeter parts of life are absolutely inseparable. I didn't think this book was quite as strong as Quiet, which is one of my favorite nonfiction books, but I thought it was full of fascinating stuff. And I think if you've ever wondered why you feel better instead of worse after consuming sad movies, TV shows, music, or books, then this might be one you want to pick up. If you'd like to hear more about this book, I did a full review of it here on my channel, and I'll link that video for you in the description box below and up in the cards. So those are all the books that I read during the month of April, or at least the ones that I had strong enough opinions about to make them worth bringing up in this wrap-up video. But if you want to keep up with everything that I'm reading, all the books that I'm currently reading, all the books I want to read, please be sure to connect with me over on Goodreads. That's where I keep track of all of my reading. You can also find me on Instagram, where I very frequently post about what I am reading right now. The links to everywhere you can find me around the internet will be at the bottom of the description box below. All the books that I mentioned in today's video, everything else I promised you throughout the video, you can find all of those links in the description box below. They are there for your clicking convenience. And if you have thoughts on any of these books that you want to share with me, or if you have any more general comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.